Mr Speaker, Scotland's already a world leader in climate change policy, be it renewables. Over 90% of our supply now, home energy efficiency, take-up of electric cars, an impressive charging network, continuous investment in electric buses and rail electrification. In fact, the Rail magazine editor said that Scotland's admirable rolling programme of electrification rolls on. Well done, Scotland. The DfT, please note, this is how it's done. Does the Minister not therefore agree that Scottish representatives should be given a key place at COP26 to share our experience, or is he just too embarrassed by UK policies by comparison?
I agree. There are Scottish businesses. A lot of the world's or the renewable energies being developed in Scotland are world leading. I couldn't possibly disagree with that. But it's important to recognise as well that all parts of the United Kingdom have an important role to play in ensuring the success of the summit. And that's all parts. I mean, I'm sure my honourable friend, or the honourable gentleman, agrees with me and is delighted as I am that the summit is to be held in Glasgow, representing the whole of the UK around the world.
Substantive question to the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week's budget provides continued UK-wide support and security to manage the ongoing impacts of COVID-19. 1 in 3 jobs in Scotland has been supported by the UK Government's unprecedented employment support package. Scottish businesses have benefited from more than £3.5 billion of loans and support driven by the UK Government schemes, and we have also provided a much-needed boost by extending the reduction of VAT for our tourism and hospitality sectors.
Let's go to Olwen Kearns. Olwen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that the benefits of the Union of Four Nations have really come to the fore over the last 12 months, in that the strength of the UK Government's balance sheet has meant that families, businesses and individuals in all parts of the UK have been able to benefit from the strength of that balance sheet, but also that the devolved administrations have received the resources that they need also to support people in all parts of the country?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely correct. And more importantly, the majority of people in Scotland agree with him as well. Not only did they emphatically reject independence in 2014, but the most recent opinion polls show that they've realised that neither the SNP nor its leader can be trusted, and that independence would make everyone in Scotland significantly worse off.
We now come to the Shadow Secretary of State with the first of 2 questions. Ian Murray.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I'm sure the Secretary of State would like to join me, and I'm sure he accidentally omitted it, in congratulating Anas Sarwar on becoming leader of the Scottish Labour Party, the very first ethnic minority leader of any UK political party. And I'm sure his positivity and optimism will transform Scotland when compared to what we have at the moment. Mr Speaker, business COVID support in Scotland has been sporadic at best, and I hope the Government will tell us how we'll get a full, transparent audit from the Scottish Government following the Audit Scotland report last week that estimated £2.7 billion was unspent, not including the £1.2 billion from last week's budget. Every penny needs spent now. So, Mr Speaker, this Government talks a lot, as we've heard already, about a post-COVID levelling up green agenda, yet is pursuing a policy in offshore renewables that benefits its business solely in the south east of England. The Government's 4th Contracts for Difference auction at the end of this year actively disadvantages viable Scottish offshore renewable projects, as BEIS includes out-of-date and expensive transmission charges in auctions bids. So what is the Secretary of State doing to ensure the Government ditches this unfair renewables policy that advantages South East England at the expense and detriment of perfectly viable offshore renewables projects off our Scottish coasts?
Well, Mr Speaker, can I begin by agreeing with the honourable gentleman and welcoming Anas Sarwar as leader of the Scottish Labour Party. And can I also agree with him that we need more transparency on the spending of the £9.6 billion of COVID support and business support that the Scottish Government's received. So I completely agree with him on that. On the transmission issue, as he will know, by law, transmission charging is a matter for Ofgem, who are an independent regulator. However, I would say to him that Ofgem are currently considering some aspects of the transmission charging arrangements through its access and forward-looking charges review. And I would encourage all Scottish generators to engage with that review at the earliest opportunity. Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I accept the answer that the Secretary of State has given, but it will disadvantage. BEIS have said they will not change the auction requirements, and therefore unless the wind blows in the south-east estuary of England, renewables in Scotland will be significantly disadvantaged, and renewables will be significantly disadvantaged. Mr Speaker, given the mess the Scottish Government are making of business and industry in Scotland, from steel to airports, ferries to aluminium smelters, I hope the UK Government delivers on its promise to protect the Scottish financial services sector post-COVID and post-Brexit. Financial services have done very well from Brexit, as long as you're in Amsterdam or Frankfurt. In Scotland, the sector employs 162,000 people and is nearly 10% of the Scottish economy, but despite its importance, was not included in the Brexit deal at all. So will the Secretary of State guarantee today that the sector will get a much-needed post-COVID boost by ensuring the Memorandum of Understanding on Financial Services, due to be signed in a matter of days with the EU, gives this critical industry the equivalence and access to EU markets that they were promised by this government?
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr Speaker, the UK and the EU have agreed in a joint declaration to establish a structured regulatory cooperation for the financial services industry. A memorandum of undertaking will be agreed in discussions between us and them to establish a framework. And those discussions, I say to the Honourable Gentleman, those discussions are currently ongoing at official level. But as with the Brexit negotiations, we can't give a running commentary.
Rob Roberts.
Question 12, sir.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer questions 12, 13 and 14 together. I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on transport connectivity in Scotland and throughout the United Kingdom. I welcome Sir Peter's interim report and I look forward to his final report in the summer.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for the answer. As connectivity and transport infrastructure is of vital importance not only for business but also for the UK's tourism industry, my right honourable friend agree that taking steps like electrifying the North Wales coastline and improving links with North West England will not only enable my constituents in Delyn to more easily enjoy the delights of Scotland, but will allow our Scottish cousins to have greater access to the beauties and wonders of our fantastic North Wales area.
Mr Speaker, why don't I just completely agree? Improving connectivity across the entire United Kingdom, including through the northwest of England, will boost tourism opportunities for both Scotland and for Wales.
John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister will know that cross-border transport routes are vital for my constituents for educational and career opportunities, as well as many other day-to-day tasks. And that's why I want to see the Borders Railway extended, and I want to see improvements to the A1, both vital routes for the Scottish borders. So does he share my frustration and shock that the SNP Scottish Government are failing to engage and support the connectivity review, which could be an opportunity to accelerate these two projects?
Shocking.
Mr Speaker, I do share his frustration, I really do. I mean, this review is part of our levelling up agenda. It's to improve the national infrastructure, it's to create jobs and create prosperity. And I think it's pathetic of the Scottish Nationalist Government not to have engaged just because it's a union connectivity review.
Let's go to Dr Neil Hudson. Dr Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As an MP for a borderlands region, strengthening and enhancing our union is of huge importance to my constituency of Penrith and the Border. Does my right honourable friend agree that projects like extending the Borders Railway down to Carlisle are a clear example of how the UK and Scottish governments can work together to improve transport links in the region? And does he agree that this would be a great boost to the economies of both the north of England and the south of Scotland and provide a gateway to unlocking the potential of both regions?
Mr Speaker, I do agree with the honourable gentleman, and I hope he'll be aware that next week we're signing the full Borderlands Growth Deal, which will include funding for the feasibility study into reopening that Borders Railway link between Carlisle and Tweedbank.
We have a substantive question to Minister Stewart.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and with permission I will answer questions 15 and 16 together. The budget confirmed an additional £1.2 billion for the Scottish Government in the next financial year. Taken together with the allocation at the last spending review, this means the Scottish Government will receive an additional £3.6 billion of funding in 21-22 through the Barnett formula, on top of the baseline of £35 billion.
Let's go to Kenny McCaskill. Kenny.
Mr Speaker, the A1, East Coast Main Line and National Grid all run through East Lothian. Yet, as this virtual call shows, broadband is as vital as older forms of infrastructure. but East Lothian has lower average download speeds, less gigabyte capacity, and many parts in the worst 10% of areas for the UK. Is this a Brexit bonus or the price of the union? And what is the Minister doing to ensure that adequate spending is there to provide the connectivity that East Lothian and Scotland requires?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, firstly, as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has mentioned in answers to the previous questions, we have just published the interim report of the Union Connectivity Review, which absolutely emphasises the need for better connectivity across all transport modes between Scotland, England and the rest of the United Kingdom. On the question of broadband speeds, of course, the recent pandemic has underlined the importance of having good digital connectivity, and this government is investing substantially in improving broadband speeds right across the United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, Scotland is delivering a pay rise for public sector workers, while the UK Government institute a real-term pay cut for its public sector staff. Does the Minister not appreciate that, as well as being unjust and a real failure to recognise the hard work of the public sector, this decision also harms the Scottish Government's ability to adequately pay our Scottish public sector staff?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, I should point out that I'm not responsible for public sector pay either in Scotland or in England. I will relay the Honourable Lady's points to my colleagues who do decide these matters. We will want to be as generous as we can be, but also keeping one eye on the overall state of the public finances. We have to keep that under control. As the Chancellor announced last week, if the international financial markets take fright at the state of our public finances, we will end up in a far worse financial position than we currently are. And I would finally point out that, of course, that if the Scottish Government wishes to increase public sector pay more than in England, they do have the fiscal powers at their disposal to do so.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson with the first of two questions, Mary Black. Mary.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The Internal Market Bill grants UK ministers the ability to provide financial assistance, particularly from the Shared Prosperity Fund, to any person for purposes that are outlined in the bill. However, there is still no detail as to how this will work in practice or what conditions will have to be met to qualify for such funding. Now, last month, a Scotland Office Minister told the Scottish Affairs Committee that further details on this matter would be provided in the now published budget. So could the Minister outline those details for us, please?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would point the Honourable Lady to the prospectuses for the first stage, the Community Renewal Fund and the Levelling Up Fund, which were published alongside the budget last week. And the point I would make to her is this is about real devolution. This is about empowering local communities, local authorities and other stakeholders to come forward with the schemes that they think are best for their local areas to help bounce back after the coronavirus pandemic and put in place the innovation and investment that will help economies grow and secure the jobs of the future.
Let's go back to Mary Black. Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Scotland Office Minister had also told the committee that there will be an opportunity to engage with stakeholders in the future about a lot of the concerns which still exist surrounding this. So could the Minister tell us what these opportunities are and when they will be made available to us?
Minister.
Well, the work we are doing will build on the very strong relationships that already exist, for example, through the City and Regional Growth Deal programme. Shortly after this session, I will, for example, be speaking to the Glasgow Area Policy Conference on these matters. And when I spoke to them a few weeks ago, the SNP leader of Glasgow Council told me that they have developed a very effective network with the local authorities in the Greater Glasgow area, with universities, with the private sector, and are putting forward very exciting bids for their future growth. It is that community-led, area-led projects that we want to encourage through our different funding streams.
Shadow Minister Chris Olmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, we finally saw the Chancellor move the cliff edge for the most vulnerable by announcing the £20 a week cut to universal credit for millions of families will be moved by just 6 months. Citizens Advice Scotland have shared that removing this increase will result in nearly 60% of CAB complex debt clients being unable to meet their living costs. What steps is the Minister doing to take forward to ensure that those least well off in Scotland are not impacted by the Chancellor's constant differing delay on ensuring that universal credit is high enough to support all people across Scotland and the United Kingdom?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, before I answer his question, can I, through him, extend my congratulations to Anas Sarwar on his election as leader of the Scottish Labour Party. I think it is a significant moment, and he will be a doughty fighter in the upcoming Holyrood elections. On universal credit, what we have done is our route map and all the indications are that the economy will be back up and running by the end of June. But we have taken, I think, the prudent step of extending not just universal credit, but furlough and some of the other support schemes to the end of September, just in case there's a delay in getting things up and running. Universal credit was always designed to be a temporary uplift to help families through the pandemic, and I think the system has worked well. And I would take this opportunity to pay tribute to all the civil servants who have administered universal credit at a time of unprecedented demand in a very effective way. What the long-term arrangements for social security payments will be is a matter which will be determined at the forthcoming spending review in the normal way. And of course the Scottish Government also does have the opportunity to supplement those with their own welfare powers.
Right, let's go to John Littleson. John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. While the UK Government is extending rates relief for only 3 months in England, the Scottish Government is doing so for the whole year, helping the retail, hospitality, leisure and aviation sectors. But the Scottish Government wants to go further. So will the Minister support Scottish businesses by calling for the full devolution of financial powers to Scotland?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. It's not correct to say that business rates are only holidays only being extended for 3 months. There is a period beyond that which is specifically targeted for businesses in the tourism, hospitality and entertainment sector beyond that. In addition, for England, there are substantial restart grants available, money for which is barnetised to the Scottish Government, and they are able to spend that as they see fit.
Right, we are now coming to questions to the Prime Minister. I will first call the Prime Minister to answer the engagements question. I will then call Daisy Cooper to ask her supplementary. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole House can be proud of the UK's vaccination programme, with over 22.5 million people now having received their first dose across the UK. We can also be proud of the support the UK has given to the international COVID response, including the £548 million we've donated to COVAX. I therefore wish to correct the suggestion from the European Council President that the UK has blocked vaccine exports. Let me be clear, we have not blocked the export of a single COVID-19 vaccine or vaccine components. This pandemic has put us all on the same side in the battle for global health. We oppose vaccine nationalism in all its forms. I trust that all sides of the House will join me in rejecting this suggestion and calling on all our partners to work together to tackle this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues in others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Let's go to Daisy Cooper. Daisy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government is throwing a staggering £37 billion at a test and trace system that we know has made barely any difference, but yet it says that it cannot afford to give more than a pitiful 1% pay rise to NHS workers. The Prime Minister has said that he owes his life to them. He stood on the steps of Number 10 and applauded them. So will the Prime Minister do more than pay lip service and pay them the wage that they deserve?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, she is indeed right that we owe a huge amount to our nurses, an incalculable debt, and that's why I'm proud that we have delivered a 12.8% increase in the starting salary of nurses and are asking the Public Pay Review Body to look at increasing their pay exceptionally of all the professions in the public sector. And as for test and trace, Mr. Speaker, it is thanks to NHS Test and Trace that we're able to send kids back to school and begin cautiously and irreversibly to reopen our economy and restart our lives.
Let's go to Gagan Mahindra. Gagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Long Marston, Bovingdon, Rickmansworth and Berkhamsted to see the damage that flooding caused to our communities firsthand. Can the Prime Minister assure this House that as the weather gets better, we do not lose the momentum of finding long-term sustainable solutions to prevent flooding in the future and to give residents the security they deserve all year round, irrespective of the weather outside?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for what he's doing to campaign for his local area for flood defences. I want to thank the Environment Agency for their tireless and imaginative and creative work that they do to find solutions, and we're investing £5.2 billion to build 2,000 new flood defences over the next 6 years.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Who does the Prime Minister think deserves a pay rise more? An NHS nurse or Dominic Cummings?
Mr. Speaker, as I told the honourable lady for the Liberal Democrats earlier on, we owe a massive debt as a society, and I personally, to the nurses of our NHS. And that's why we've asked the Public Sector Pay Review Body exceptionally to look at their pay. I want to stress, however, as the House knows, that starting salaries for nurses have gone up by 12.8% over the last 3 years. And it is thanks to the package that this government has put in place that we now have 10,600 more nurses in our NHS, Mr. Speaker, than there were 1 year ago, and 60,000 more in training.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he says nurses' pay has gone up. I know he's desperate to distance himself from the Conservatives' record over the last decade. As he well knows, since 2010, nurses' pay has fallen in real terms by more than £800. And he didn't answer my question. It was a very simple question. He's been talking about affordability. He could afford to give Dominic Cummings a 40% pay rise. He could afford that. Now he's asking NHS nurses to take a real-term pay cut. How on earth does he justify that?
Mr. Speaker, as I repeat the point that I have made, I believe that we all owe a massive debt to our nurses, indeed all our healthcare workers and our social care workers. And one of the things that they tell me when I go to hospitals, Mr. Speaker, as I know the right honourable gentleman does, is that in addition to pay, one of their top concerns is to have more colleagues on the wards to help them with the undoubted stress and strains of the pandemic, and that's why we provided another £5,000 in bursaries for nurses, another £3,000 to help them with particular costs of training and with childcare, Mr. Speaker. And it's because of that package that this year, I believe, we're seeing another 34% increase in applications for nurses, and we are on target. This government of this party of the NHS is on target to deliver 50,000 more nurses in our NHS, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about recruitment. There are currently 40,000 nursing vacancies, 40,000 and 7,000 doctors' vacancies. How on earth does he think a pay cut is going to help solve that? And frankly, I'd take the Prime Minister a bit more seriously if he hadn't spent £2.6 million of taxpayers' money on a Downing Street TV studio or £200,000 on new wallpaper for his flat. Mr. Speaker, they say charity starts at home, but I think the Prime Minister's taking a bit too literally. Let me try something very simple. Does the Prime Minister accept that NHS staff will be hundreds of pounds worse off a year because of last week's budget?
No, Mr. Speaker, because, and of course we will look at what the independent pay review body has to say exceptionally about the the nursing profession, whom we particularly value. But what he should also know, and which he should reflect to the House, is that under this government, we not only began by a record increase in NHS funding over, I think, £33.9 billion, but because of the pandemic, we put another £63 billion into supporting our NHS, Mr. Speaker, on top of the £140 billion of in-year spending. And it's because of this government that in 1 year alone, Mr. Speaker, there are another 49,000 people working in our NHS. And that, I think, is something that is of massive benefit, not just to patients, but to hard-pressed nurses as well.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, my mum was a nurse. My sister was a nurse. My wife works in the NHS. I know what it means to work for the NHS. When I clapped for carers, I meant it. He clapped for carers, then he shut the door in their face at the first opportunity. And the more you look at the Prime Minister's decision, the worse it gets. Because it's not just a pay cut, it's a broken promise too. Time and time again, he said that the NHS wouldn't pay the price for this pandemic. 2 years ago, he made a promise to the NHS. Here in black and white, his document, it commits to a minimum pay rise of 2.1%. It's been budgeted for and now it's being taken away. He shakes his head. His MPs voted for it. So why, after everything the NHS has done for us, is he now breaking promise after promise?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he voted against the document in question, which is to crown the absurdity of his point. Under this government, we have massively increased funding for our amazing NHS, with the result, as I say, there are 6,500 more doctors this year than there were last year, 18,000 more healthcare workers and 10,600 more nurses. And we're going to go on, Mr. Speaker, and we are going to deliver our promises. I can tell the right honourable gentleman. We are going to go on and we're going to build 40 more hospitals, and we're going to recruit 50,000 more nurses, and we're going to get on and deliver on our pledges to the British people. And we're going to do that because of our sound management of the economy and the fastest vaccine rollout programme of any comparable country, which, frankly, if we'd followed his precepts and his ideas, we would certainly not have been able to achieve.
He says he voted for it, he did. And now he's ripped it up. 2.1% ripped up. And if the Prime Minister won't listen to me, he should listen to what his own Conservative MPs are saying about this. His own side. This is what they say. Behind you, Prime Minister, it's inept. It's unacceptable. It's pathetic. These are Conservative MPs about the Prime Minister's pay cut for nurses. And that's before his answers today. Another of MPs said this, Mr. Speaker, and this is perhaps the most telling of all the comments. This MP said, sitting behind him, the public just hear 1% and they think how mean we are. Mr. Speaker, even his own MPs know he's got this wrong. Why is he going ahead with it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what the public know is that we're increasing starting pay for nurses by 12.8% over the last 3 years. They know that this government, in the last year, has put another £5,000 bursary into the pockets of nurses because we support them, and as well as the 3,000 extra for training. And of course, it's very, very important that the public sector pay review body should come back with its proposals, and we will, of course, study them. But as I say, it is thanks to the investment made by this government that there are 49,000 more people in the NHS this year than last year, 10,600 more nurses helping to relieve the burden on our hard-pressed nurses. That is what this government is investing in.
Keir Starmer.
Speaker, he says, we support them, we'll reward them. He's cutting their pay. Mr. Speaker, not true, he says. Not true. Prime Minister, a 1% rise versus 1.7% inflation rise. That is a real terms cut. And if the Prime Minister doesn't understand that, we really are in trouble. Mr. Speaker, they promised honesty, but the truth is they can afford to give Dominic Cummings a 40% pay rise, and they can't afford to reward the NHS properly. The mask really is slipping, and we can see what the Conservative Party now stands for. Cutting pay for nurses, putting taxes up on families. He's had the opportunity to change course, but he's refused. So if he's so determined to cut NHS pay, we at least show some courage and put it to a vote in this Parliament.
Mr. Speaker, the last time we had put it to a vote, he voted against it. As I said before, we're increasing pay for nurses. We're massively increasing our investment in the NHS. We are steering a steady course, whereas he weaves and wobbles from one week to the next, Mr. Speaker. One week he's attacking us, saying we should be doing more testing. The next week he's denouncing us for spending money on testing. One week he calls for us for a faster rollout of PPE. The next week he's saying we spent too much, Mr. Speaker. He's got to make his mind. One week he calls for a faster vaccination rollout when he actually voted, although he claims to have forgotten it, to stay in the European Medicines Agency. Perhaps he'd like to confirm that he voted to stay in the European Medicines Agency, Mr. Speaker, which would have made that vaccine rollout impossible. We vaccinate, we get on with delivering for the people of this country. We vaccinate, he vacillates, Mr. Speaker, and that's the difference.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The incredible success of our vaccination programme, for which the Prime Minister and this government deserve immense credit, now means that tourism businesses in Blackpool can look forward to a successful summer season when the economy reopens. When the time is right, will the Prime Minister support a campaign encouraging people to holiday here in the UK this summer, and will he join me in Blackpool to launch that campaign and to showcase everything we have to offer?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I will look very carefully at my diary to see whether I can actually get up to Blackpool. I have many happy memories of joyful evenings spectating at the illuminations of Blackpool, and I know that Blackpool will play an important part in the tourism recovery that we hope to see this summer if we continue on our roadmap.
We have technical issues with the leader of the SNP, so I'm going to ask Kirsten Oswald as the deputy leader to stand in. Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister published his plans for an Erasmus replacement without any consultation or discussion with devolved governments. The replacement scheme offers lower living support, no travel support, no tuition fee support. Why is this Tory government taking opportunities away from our young people?
Well, Mr. Speaker, she is a delightfully concise question, I may say. But she is wrong about the difference between the Erasmus and the Turing project, because the Turing scheme, unlike the Erasmus scheme, which overwhelmingly went to kids from better off homes, the Turing project is designed to help kids across the country of all income groups get to fantastic universities around the world.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker, that's just not the case. We know we can't trust a word the Prime Minister says on this. He told us there's no threat to the Erasmus scheme, but he clearly won't match EU levels of support. And it's not just us saying it. His own Scottish colleague told the BBC last week young people won't benefit from Brexit. They've saddled a generation with tuition fee debt. Now they're closing the door with Erasmus. It's no wonder that students are choosing the SNP and independence for a prosperous future. So, Prime Minister, will you think again? Will you do the right thing? Engage with our EU friends and rejoin Erasmus?
Can I just remind members not to use you? Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, I think students should choose the Turing project because it's fantastic and it reaches out across the whole country. And I believe, by the way, Mr. Speaker, they should reject the SNP because it's totally a Scottish nationalist party, Mr. Speaker, because it is failing the people of Scotland, failing to deliver on education, failing on crime, and failing on the economy. And I think that I hope very much that the people of Scotland will go for common sense, and instead of endlessly going on about constitutional issues, instead of endlessly campaigning for a referendum, which I think is the last thing the people of this country need right now, I think people want a government that focuses on the issues that matter to them, including a fantastic international education scheme like Turing.
Right, let's go to Jeremy Wright. Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will recognise that while COVID restrictions have been in place, children have not only had to learn online rather than in the classroom, but have also missed out on cultural, artistic and sporting activities with their peers. At the same time, cultural, artistic and sporting organisations have remained restricted in what they can do, and despite the considerable help offered to them, are still in need of government support. So can I ask him to consider how we might put those two things together and provide for enrichment activities available to all young people over the coming months, funded by government and provided not by hard-pressed teachers, but by our outstanding culture and sports sectors, while they're unable to reopen to the wider public?
My right honourable friend has been a great champion of the arts and culture sectors, and he's completely right about the role that they can play for young people in the recovery, and that's why the massive £2 billion recovery fund that we've given to thousands of theatres and orchestras, choirs, music venues and others, we hope will be used for the benefit and the cultural enrichment of young people up and down the country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's fantasy bridge to Northern Ireland could cost £33 billion. This while our road and rail networks have been absolutely decimated from decades of underinvestment. The Conservative Party got a grand total of 2,399 votes at the last Assembly election. What mandate does he think he has to override the democratically elected people of Northern Ireland to impose a bridge that goes through miles of unexploded munitions and radioactive waste?
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Speaker, actually, if he read the article I wrote this morning in the Daily Telegraph, he will have seen that the things that we've set out in the Hendy review, I think, would be of massive benefit to Northern Ireland, including upgrading the A75, which is the single biggest thing that people in Northern Ireland wanted, by the way, and which the Scottish Nationalists have National Party have totally failed to do, as well as better connections east-west within Northern Ireland, which we should be doing as well as better connections north-south within the island of Ireland. It's a fantastic union connectivity review. He should appreciate it. It's the way forward, and I'm amazed, frankly, at his negativity.
Paul Holmes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the claims of Eastleigh Liberal Democrats, my constituents will be delighted to know that the concrete section of the M27 will start to be resurfaced this summer. Does the Prime Minister agree that this shows that it is Conservative governments that invest in infrastructure, and that if elected in May, Conservative candidates like Jerry Hall will deliver for the people of Eastleigh, Hedge End and West End?
It's absolutely true, Mr. Speaker. It is Conservative governments who invest in it. It is Conservative government that's putting £640 billion into an infrastructure revolution. And I congratulate Jerry Hall on what he's doing to resurface the road and to make it quieter. And I hope that he will be duly elected in May.
David Linden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In extending the £20 uplift to universal credit, which we welcome at the beginning of the pandemic, the Prime Minister was clearly conceding that social security support in the UK is inadequate. So, whilst I welcome the fact it's been extended for 6 months, I'd like to see it being made permanent. But can you tell the House why, if it was so inadequate, why it wasn't extended to those on legacy benefits, such as disabled people?
Mr. Speaker, throughout the pandemic, we've done whatever we can to look after people throughout the country, whether on benefits or those who have lost their jobs, sadly, because of the pandemic. And I'm very proud of what Universal Credit has been able to achieve. And I think that he should perhaps take it up with his friends in the Labour Party who actually want to abolish Universal Credit.
We now go to Leah Nietzsche. Leah.
Mr. Speaker, last week Grimsby celebrated the Chancellor's announcements of the Towns Fund and the Humber Freeport. And it's clear to the people of Grimsby that it's this government that is determined not to neglect the town like Labour predecessors. Our next challenge is to raise skills and education achievement in the town. Would the Prime Minister outline how people can take advantage of the new lifetime skills guarantee that is launching next month?
Thank you. Well, Mr. Speaker, the fantastic thing about the Lifetime Skills Guarantee is that in very, very tough circumstances, with many people having, I'm afraid, inevitably to seek new jobs, to find ways of retraining, as will happen in a changing economy, it offers everybody, adults over 23, the opportunity, £3,000 on an A-level equivalent qualification. I think will be absolutely instrumental in helping young people beyond school age to retrain and get the jobs they need. The Lifetime Skills Guarantee. It's the first time it's been done, Mr. Speaker.
Right, let's go to Claire Hanna. Claire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It takes some 16,000 dedicated nurses to staff Northern Ireland's health service, costing around £380 million per year. That's less than 2% of UK sales for just one internet giant, Amazon, whose revenues doubled during lockdown. What possible reason can the Prime Minister and his Chancellor, who both talked about the need to pay for this pandemic, have to not apply a modest windfall tax on those businesses who have benefited so much from the pandemic in order to properly pay those staff who have worked so hard to bring us through the pandemic?
Actually, I think that she's making an important point about the discrepancy in the tax paid by some online businesses and some concrete businesses, and that's an issue which the Chancellor is trying to address in an equitable way, working with colleagues in the G7 and around the world.
Let's go to Cheryl Murray. Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've seen the disgraceful way the EU have responded to UK fish exports. Part of the answer is for UK consumers to buy British fish. As chairman of the APPG for Fisheries, could I invite the Prime Minister to join a fantastic British chef to show how easy it is to prepare and cook a dish using British caught fish?
Well, I'm very happy to take up my honourable friend's suggestion. I'm not the greatest chef myself, but I have made and can make, from memory, a fish pie with haddock and prawns, which I undertake to do, Mr. Speaker.
British haddock. Kate Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, people like my constituent, Tessa Stevens, have had to keep their salons shut despite shrinking government support, unchanged overheads and decreased profits. I am urgently seeking the Prime Minister's support to protect the immediate and long-term recovery of beauty businesses and the jobs it supports. Will the Prime Minister explain why his government refuses to listen to the beauty industry, who are calling for VAT to be temporarily reduced to 5% for hair and beauty businesses, similar to what has happened to other sectors like hospitality, tourism and culture businesses?
She's absolutely right in what she says about the importance of beauty businesses. They do an amazing job, and we want them to bounce back very strongly from the pandemic. And I want high street beauty salons to be opening up in the way that they were in the past, rather than people going around giving services at cutting hair at home. I think it's very important we revive high street salons, and that's why we are continuing with the cautious but irreversible roadmap out of this, which I think will enable a full recovery for the entire sector. But in the meantime, as she knows, the Chancellor has extended furlough and all the other provisions that are necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the Union Connectivity Review that's been announced this morning? It's brilliant news to connect the whole of the UK. But in West Dorset, Mr. Speaker, we have single-track railway lines. We have a 3-hourly rail frequency, yet we have the highest level of roadside pollution anywhere in the UK. Will my right honourable friend kindly support a levelling up rail proposal that will not only look to support West Dorset, but also some of the most deprived areas in the southwest?
Yeah. My honourable friend knows whereof he speaks. He's probably one of the greatest experts on railways in this House, and we're certainly determined to follow his lead and to upgrade services in the West Country and in Dorset. He knows what's happening at Dawlish and elsewhere, and Network Rail has identified proposals including improvement of the performance of the West of England line, which is currently being assessed. But he's knocking at an open door, Mr. Speaker.
Right, let's go to Dan Carden. Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in 2012, commissioning for alcohol and drug addiction treatment was taken out of the NHS and handed to local authorities. And those services are now overwhelmed after a decade of cuts and fragmentation. And last year, the UK recorded the highest number of alcohol-specific deaths since records began. Addiction is an illness that can be treated. So will the Prime Minister urgently investigate the rise in deaths and bring addiction treatment back into the NHS within mental health services and give it the funding it requires?
Minister.
He's entirely right, Mr. Speaker, to draw attention to the importance of addiction treatment and its relationship to mental health, and that's why the government is investing record sums in mental health, £13.3 billion, Mr. Speaker, and of course treatment for alcoholism is part of that.
Let's go to Theo Clark. Theo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've seen firsthand, visiting both the St George's and county hospitals in Stafford, the great work that is being done to support people, including veterans, with their mental health. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that sadly the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to have had a negative impact on people's mental health? And will he commit to working with me and the Stafford Mental Health Network to improve and increase the mental health provision in Stafford?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I was certainly very happy to discuss that with my honourable friend, or make sure that she gets access to the relevant ministerial authority. But what we're doing, in addition to the 13.3 billion that I spoke of, we've been supporting mental health charities throughout the pandemic, and particularly focusing on the mental health needs of children and young people, which is why I appointed Dr. Alex George to be our youth mental health ambassador, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this government is failing young people. Before the pandemic, apprenticeship starts were down by 28% for under 19-year-olds, £330 million unspent levy back to the Treasury, falling short by 81% in creating the promised 100,000 new apprenticeships. This month, I will be holding my 5th Apprenticeships and Jobs Fair in Bristol South. Will he join me in urging all young people to support that fair in Bristol South? But will he apologise to them for failing them so far?
Mr. Speaker, I think jobs fairs are an important thing, and I know that colleagues across the House do them, but I also think that the government can be proud of the record that we've had in getting record numbers of young people into employment. We're now faced with a very severe problem caused by the pandemic, and that's why we're addressing it not just with the lifetime skills guarantee that I mentioned earlier on, but also with the Kickstart funds, the Restart funds, £2 billion going into Kickstart alone to help young people into the jobs that they need.
Demi Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After putting in a fantastic bid, Southport last week got a £37.5 million Towns deal. This will be transformational and represents the levelling up agenda of the Prime Minister and this Conservative government. When his diary allows, will he come to Southport to see these projects as they unfold and the impact they'll have on the lives of my constituents?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm told that the Boulevard of Light on Lord Street rivals the Champs-Élysées itself, and I will certainly keep my honourable friend's invitation in mind.
McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this House, we all know the importance of those people who've looked after our vulnerable loved ones over the past year when we have been unable to do so. So will the Prime Minister explain to me why, in this country, we have 375,000 care workers on a 0-hours contract?
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of what the government has done to increase the wages of care workers across the country, with record increases in the living wage. And this country is unlike most other countries in the world in the speed with which we've vaccinated care home workers, Mr. Speaker, and their elderly charges.
James Grundy. James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, may I thank the Prime Minister for his commitment to levelling up the North, the benefits of which we are already beginning to see, with a £15 million allocation from the government's Transforming Cities Fund, enabling the plans to reopen Golden Station in my constituency of Lee to progress. Would the Prime Minister not only welcome this progress, but also back my campaign to reopen Kenyon Junction railway station, which will help unlock the potential of Lee, provide my constituents with a vital rail connection between Liverpool and Manchester, and ensure Lee is no longer one of the largest towns in the UK without a railway station?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to support my honourable friend's initiative, and I understand that the Goulburn, which he represents, was the site of the world's very first railway junction, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Alan Smith. Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anthony Jones, a ferociously bright student at Stirling University, was looking to do a master's in Amsterdam. Pre-Brexit, the course fees were £2,168. Post-Brexit, the fees are £14,000 £600. The Turing scheme won't touch the sides of what's necessary. Would the Prime Minister like to apologise to Anthony and countless hundreds of thousands of students like him for limiting their life horizons against their will?
Mr. Speaker, because I think that the Turing scheme is fairer and it's something that will enable students on lower incomes to have access to courses, to great courses around the world, and I believe it's a highly beneficial reform to the way we do that. It's a truly global in its ambitions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A new station at Mere and investing in Longton Station and also restoring the Stoke to Leek line. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree with me that investment from this government has the potential to reverse the beaching cuts, restore our local railways in Stoke-on-Trent and cement our position as one of the best places connected in the whole UK?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend. I know he supported the bid for the reinstatement of the Stoke to Leek line. It's currently being assessed by the Department for Transport as one of the beaching reversals, which are so popular around the country and so right, and he can expect an outcome in the summer, Mr. Speaker.
Let's go to Dan Jarvis. Dan.
If the Prime Minister is serious about levelling up the country, does he honestly think that favouring the Chancellor's Richmondshire constituency over Barnsley for financial support is the best way to do it?
Mr. Speaker, we are devoted to levelling up across the entire country, and that goes for Barnsley as well as everywhere else.
Let's go to Chris Grayling. Chris.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I know the Prime Minister shares my commitment to conservation around the world, and I'm sure in particular he agrees we have got to reverse the tide of deforestation. Will he ask ministers in DEFRA to look seriously at my proposals for a kite mark scheme for food products in the UK so consumers can see clearly whether or not the products they buy come from sustainable sources or whether they're coming from producers who are doing further damage to our environment?
Prime Minister.
Very happy to look at my right honourable friend's very interesting suggestion for a kite mark scheme. But in the meantime, this government is leading the world in tackling deforestation with a £3 billion investment being led across Whitehall.
Is the point of order relevant to the Prime Minister's questions?
It is indeed.
Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, twice from that dispatch box, said that the Labour opposition voted against the NHS funding bill and the 2.1% increase for NHS staff. This is not the case. Indeed, in the debate, as Hansard will show, I was explicit that we would not be dividing the House. So can you, Mr. Speaker, use your good offices to get the Prime Minister to return to the House to correct the record? And do you agree, Mr. Speaker, that if the Prime Minister wants to cut nurses' pay, he should have the courage of his convictions to bring a vote back to the House?
Can I just say, first of all, it's not a point of order. It is certainly a point of clarification. That part has been achieved, but I'm certainly not going to be drawn into a debate, as the Shadow Secretary of State well knows. I am now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary raise for the next business made. Order.